My mother slammed my autistic brother's face into his dinner plate for staring at her key. When I begged her to stop, she screamed, "You want it? You think you deserve to look at what's mine? I just found out what that key was for. I regret being curious." My mother wore a brass key around her neck that would one day save our lives, but first it nearly culled us. She never took it off, not in the shower, not in bed. The leather cord had left a permanent mark on her skin from 13 years of never coming off. Growing up, we had one rule that mattered above all others. Nobody touches the key. When I was 6, I asked what it opened. She held my hand over the stove burner until the skin blistered and peeled. After that, I learned to look away when she leaned down. But Charlie was 8 and had autism and couldn't remember rules like that. She caught him staring at it during dinner. His eyes followed it as it swung forward when she reached for the salt. I saw her face change. She grabbed his jaw and slammed his face into the dinner table. The crack echoed through the kid O'Reilly. Blood splattered across his mac and cheese as she did it again. "You want it?" she screamed. "You think you deserve to look at what's mine?" The emergency room doctor bought her bike accident story. They always did. Charlie came home with his jaw wired shut, and she made him write lines with his broken fingers anyway. The punishments in our house were specific. Hot spoons pressed into our arms for talking back. Bleach in the bathwater for impure thoughts. Stand in the corner on one foot for 6 hours if you breathe too loud. She'd touch that key before each session like she was asking it permission. By the time I turned 14, I'd mapped every lock in our house. The key didn't fit any of them. Not the basement door, not her jewelry box, not the filing cabinet. Charlie thought it was for a safety deposit box. I thought maybe it was from her childhood home. We whispered theories at night when the house was quiet. The torture got worse as we got older. She'd make us kneel on rice for hours, put bars of soap in our mouths until we threw up, lock us in the basement freezer for 30-second intervals. Just enough to hurt, but not enough to cause damage anyone would notice. She was smart like that. One night, she kept Charlie awake for 72 hours straight by spraying him with ice water every time his eyes closed. I listened to him sob through the walls while she laughed. Something in me snapped. We had to get out or we'd die there. That's when I started really planning. I got a job at McDonald's and hid cash in a tampon box under my bed. I researched youth shelters in other states, but minimum wage wasn't enough for 2 bus tickets and food and a place to stay. We needed more money. I found the floorboard by accident. She was at her Wednesday church meeting and I was stealing her sleeping pills to help Charlie rest. My foot hit a loose board in her closet. Underneath was a keyhole. She knew. She always knew everything. I woke up zip-tied in the basement. 1 week down there with nothing but water and stale bread. When she finally let me out, she was smiling. "Curiosity is a waste of time," she said. "Remember that." 6 months later, she told us Charlie was too damaged to keep. Said she'd found a special facility upstate that could fix him, handle his issues better. I knew there was no facility. I'd heard her on the phone with someone asking about unmarked graves. That's when I put my plan into action. Every Friday, she drank herself stupid after hurting us. I'd been stealing her Ambien for months and grinding it into powder. That Friday, I put 20 pills in her vodka bottle. She took forever to pass out. I sat on the stairs counting her breaths until they got deep and regular. The key had fallen forward on its cord. I lifted it off her neck so slowly it took 5 full minutes. Charlie kept watch while I ran to her room. The floorboard came up easily. I turned the key and heard the lock click open. Inside was $30,000 in cash. Our birth certificates with different names. Adam and James Henley, not Charlie and Ryan O'Reilly. Our real parents' death certificates. Police photos of a car accident. 2 bodies in the front seats. At the bottom was adoption paperwork never filed and our father's service weapon. A Glock 19 with a full clip. She wasn't our mother. She was our father's sister. She'd culled them both and taken us and the survivor benefits. 9 years of checks meant for us. I stared at the gun for a long time. Part of me wanted to use it, end her like she ended them, but we weren't like her. I took the money and our real documents, left the GN and evidence for whoever found it. We caught a Greyhound to Seattle at 3 a.m. and never heard from her again, until a month later, when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't my mother, it was the police. Turns out she had used the GN to blow her brains out and even left a note behind. In it, she detailed how her sewer slide was all me and Charlie's fault. The officers stood in our doorway holding official paperwork with names I hadn't heard spoken aloud in 13 years. Adam and James Henley. Charlie rocked in the corner of our small Seattle apartment, sensing danger the way he always did. His fingers tapped against his thigh in the pattern that meant he was scared. The taller officer cleared his throat and explained about the woman's sewer slide. She'd left a note. Charlie started humming our real mother's lullaby, the one from before everything went wrong. The officers exchanged a glance at the authentic detail, something they couldn't have known unless we really were who the paperwork said. My panicked response came out before I could stop it. She actually found our birth certificates? The words hung in the air, making the officers lean forward with new interest. What else might be hidden if we'd gone to such lengths to disappear? Our neighbor across the hall chose that moment to emerge, frantic about a break-in at her apartment. She needed the police immediately. The officers looked between us and her, and I had to make a choice. Help her and seem like good citizens, or stay silent and look suspicious. Charlie whispered from his corner, barely audible. "She's watching." I tried to position myself between the officers and Charlie, who had crept closer despite his fear, but the shorter officer was already unfolding the sewer slide note. He read it aloud in a flat, professional voice. Charlie started hitting himself when he heard the words, "You stole everything from me." The woman's handwriting, even described secondhand, sent chills through me. Charlie's meltdown escalated quickly. He banged his head against the wall, screaming wordlessly. The officers stepped back, one reaching for his radio. They called for backup and social services. 3 problems crashed down at once. Charlie needed his medication refill, but the prescription was under our fake names. The police wanted us for questioning, and our landlord appeared at the end of the hallway, red-faced about noise complaints from other tenants. I scrambled to handle the landlord first, pulling out our lease to prove we were legitimate tenants, but the document showed our fake names. O'Reilly. The officer's eyes narrowed as he compared the lease to his paperwork, but the lease says O'Reilly, he observed quietly. The sympathy that had flickered in their eyes began to fade paid. I admitted we were using fake names, the words tumbling out in a rush, but explaining why without sounding completely delusional seemed impossible. How could I tell them about the abuse, the murders, the 13 years of torture without proof? Charlie had stopped screaming, but now recited information in his mechanical way when overwhelmed. Our real birthdays, social security numbers he'd memorized from those stolen documents. He knew the truth, but to the officers it must have seemed like coaching. Like I'd drilled these facts into a vulnerable adult for some nefarious purpose. That's when I spotted it. In the evidence bag the shorter officer carried, I could see the woman's jewelry. She'd kept our mother's wedding ring all these years. Through the clear plastic, I could just make out the inscription on the band. The room spun as I processed this new cruelty. The officers decided to separate us for questioning. Charlie screamed about the key as they guided him to the hallway, his words making me look even more like a manipulator who'd filled his head with fantasies. The brass key that had defined our childhood was now evidence in her death. The social worker arrived within an hour, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who'd clearly seen too much. She needed our medical records, but I had to explain that the woman had destroyed everything from before we were 6. Only the fake name records from her doctor remained, and those contained 13 years of detailed documentation. Every visit where she'd brought us in with injuries, every lie she'd told, every time she'd painted us as troubled, violent children who hurt themselves. My explanation of how we'd escaped sounded exactly like the revenge fantasies documented in my therapy files. The woman had forced me to attend sessions with her friend, a therapist who wrote down everything I said and twisted it. Now my desperate truth sounded like the delusions of a disturbed young man who'd drugged his mother and stolen from her. The woman's Facebook memorial page was already filling with posts. Loving mother, devoted caregiver, taken too soon. Our absence from the morning was noted repeatedly. Heartless, cold. What kind of sons don't even show up for their mother? The neighbors in our building had started their own discussion thread, sharing screenshots and speculation. I tried to show evidence on my phone, photos and recordings I'd kept just in case, but the detective who joined the investigation flagged it as obsessive documentation. No normal person keeps such detailed records of their parent, he said. It suggested planning, premeditation, and unhealthy fixation. Then came the will. Dated 2 years before her sewers lied, it named us as beneficiaries, but with a cruel clause. We could only inherit if we completed a reconciliation therapy program. The therapist named in the will was the woman's best friend, the same one who'd documented my supposed violent fantasies for years. I hadn't slept in 72 hours. The stress, the fear, the constant questions made me stumble over my words. When trying to explain the timeline of her death, I misspoke. When we called, I caught myself but too late. When she called herself, the detective's pen scratched across his notepad. Charlie's autism advocate arrived to observe his questioning. The woman's friend had already reached her, showing years of emails where the woman expressed concern about her violent sons. She documented everything about their violence, the friend had said, producing file folders of manufactured evidence. The advocate's professional sympathy shifted to Charlie, but not in the way we needed. She saw him as a victim, all right, but a victim of me. Our Seattle neighbors had started whispering in the hallways. Those brothers who drove their mother to sewers lied. Someone had started an apartment building Facebook group to discuss the situation. Screenshots of old posts, security footage of us coming and going, anything that could be twisted into evidence of our cruelty spread through the digital grapevine. The woman had claimed Charlie attacked her the week before we left. She had hospital records from self-inflicted injuries dated perfectly to support her story. Photos of bruises, a split lip, scratches on her arms, all self-inflicted but documented as assault by her own son. My only friend in Seattle worked at a tech company. I'd been planning to ask for his help, maybe crash on his couch while we figured things out, but his boss was the woman's brother, who'd flown out to handle arrangements. My friend stopped responding to texts after his boss arrived. I tried to prove one of the woman's lies by accessing her medical records from when she'd claimed we'd poisoned her, but revealing how I'd gotten into the system meant admitting to violating HIPAA laws. The truth made me a criminal. Every attempt to defend ourselves dug us deeper. The bodega security camera had caught us the day after her death. We'd stopped for supplies, and the relief on our faces was obvious. We'd smiled, laughed even. Charlie had done his happy flapping. The footage spread through the community as proof of our cold hearts. What kind of monsters celebrate their mother's death? The woman's brother arrived at our apartment building 3 days after the police. Uncle, he insisted we call him, though we'd never met him before. He stood in our doorway with legal papers, claiming guardianship of Charlie. The woman had orchestrated one final manipulation from beyond the grave, a posthumous custody battle designed to separate us forever. The pieces fell into place as I stared at the uncle's sympathetic face. The woman had planned everything, the sewer slide note, the timing, the documentation. Even her death was one last act of control, ensuring we'd never truly escape. Charlie pressed against my side, humming anxiously as the uncle explained how he only wanted what was best for us. The uncle's voice was gentle, reasonable. He quoted the woman's favorite self-help book without seeming to realize it, her words living on through him. He'd already started dating my boss at the McDonald's where I worked. By the end of the week, I was fired for unreliability during a family crisis. The uncle expressed such sympathy when he heard. These things happen, he said. Family comes first. The uncle and I compared memories of the same Christmas morning from years ago. His version had the woman baking cookies while we opened presents. Mine had Charlie and me locked in the basement while she entertained church friends upstairs. We both believed our memories completely. The woman had poisoned both versions of reality so thoroughly that neither of us could trust what was real anymore. My old texts surfaced in the uncle's custody filing the following week. Messages to friends where I'd vented about wanting her dead, planning to run away, fantasizing about freedom. Each message, taken out of context, painted me as the disturbed son she'd always claimed I was. The phrase, "I've been planning this for years," appeared highlighted in yellow on the legal documents. Charlie's first supervised visit with the uncle went better than I'd feared. When Charlie returned, he kept talking about how the uncle helped him better. The uncle didn't make him count rice grains when he made made mistakes. The uncle bought him the brand of crackers he liked, small kindnesses that felt like betrayals of everything we'd survived together. 2 weeks after the woman's death, doorbell camera footage emerged from a neighbor's system. The video showed the woman on our doorstep, crying and begging us to be good boys. What the camera didn't capture was the discipline session that preceded her performance. The burns hidden under our clothes, the way she'd smiled at us through the window before ringing the bell. Family court treated my abuse allegations as textbook parental alienation. The mediator explained that children who lose a parent often create elaborate justifications for their anger. My detailed documentation became evidence of obsession rather than proof of survival. Every piece of evidence I presented got twisted into something sinister. I used the woman's passwords to access her email account before the uncle thought to change them. Hidden in her drafts folder was a memoir she'd been writing about raising disturbed boys. An agent had already expressed interest. She'd received an advance payment. Our torture had been material for her book deal. Security footage from the public library showed the woman researching narcissistic children and when to give up on difficult kids. She'd printed articles about reactive attachment disorder and oppositional defiance, building her case against us even as she created the very behaviors she documented. My old therapist received a subpoena to testify about our sessions. The woman had sent me to her friend for mandatory therapy after each punishment. Now those sessions would be used against me. Years of twisted documentation where my anger at abuse became evidence of violent fantasies. I tried recording the uncle during our next interaction, hoping to capture his threats. My phone died mysteriously just as he began speaking. The uncle smiled at the battery notification, and I realized he'd been jamming the signal somehow. Every attempt to gather evidence failed in ways that made me look increasingly paranoid. Charlie's medication refills required a guardian's signature. The uncle used this as daily leverage, making Charlie come to him for each dose. I watched my brother's independence erode as he learned to depend on the uncle for basic needs. The system that should have protected us became another weapon. The woman's nurse friend had worked at the clinic where she'd taken us for treatment. This nurse had seen the pattern of injuries, the suspicious timing, the way the woman's stories never quite matched our wounds. But when I approached her, she chose retirement over testifying. She couldn't lose her pension over this, she explained, looking everywhere but at my face. Social media became another battlefield. The uncle posted a photo from the woman's house, casually wearing our father's distinctive watch. In the background, barely visible, sat our father's cologne on the dresser, trophies of the dead displayed like casual accessories. The uncle made his first real offer 3 weeks into the custody battle. He would drop everything if I publicly admitted the woman had been a good mother, if I apologized for the pain we'd caused her, if I acknowledged that we'd driven her to take her own life. My refusal got framed as not caring about Charlie's stability and medical needs. I discovered something that shattered my understanding of the timeline. The woman had called our parents the day after our father filed for divorce, not during a routine drive like she'd always claimed. The custody battle over us had been the motive. Our father had been trying to save us when she murdered them both. Looking through old photos, I realized the woman had been documenting bruises on herself for years, each photo carefully angled to suggest we'd inflicted them, dates that corresponded with school events or doctor visits. She'd been building evidence of our violence while inflicting it on us. What I'd thought was proof of abuse turned out to be her documentation for a restraining order she'd never filed. Every injury I'd photographed, every incident I'd recorded, she'd already twisted into evidence of our danger to her. My proof became her vindication. The grandmother emerged from a nursing home where the woman had placed her years ago. She had to choose between her dead daughter's memory and the grandsons she barely knew. When she saw us, recognition flickered in her eyes. She whispered that the woman was all she had left of her son. The woman's gaslighting had convinced her own mother that dementia was setting in. Now her testimony would be inadmissible. The grandmother believed us, though. In lucid moments, she remembered things. How the woman had always been troubled. How our father had been afraid of his sister. But dementia diagnoses don't reverse themselves just because the gaslighting stops. I started photographing Charlie's meltdowns to document how the uncle's manipulation was affecting him. Each photo felt like a betrayal of my brother's trust. But I needed evidence of the deterioration. The protective brother I'd always been died a little more with each click of the camera. The coffee shop near the courthouse became my observation post. The woman's lawyer met clients at the same table every Tuesday. I positioned myself at the crowded counter, pretending to wait for complicated orders while listening to strategy sessions. Learning their plans felt like the only advantage I had left. Before the uncle realized the woman's cloud storage had been a joint account, I downloaded everything I could. Years of emails, documents, photos, evidence that might save us hidden among evidence that could damn us. The race to find useful information before losing access consumed my nights. A biological daughter surfaced from the foster care system. The woman had given up a baby before she'd taken us. Now this stranger wanted inheritance rights to the survivor benefits that had been meant for us. Fighting a war on two fronts meant I missed Charlie's psychiatric evaluation. The court marked me as a non-compliant guardian. Legal fees drained the money I'd hidden while the uncle used the woman's accounts freely for funeral expenses. Every dollar spent on lawyers was a dollar not available for Charlie's future care. The financial stranglehold tightened daily. A public confrontation at the woman's grave turned into another mark against me. I'd gone to confirm she was really dead, really gone. The uncle appeared with flowers and a photographer. My reaction to seeing him there traumatized the groundskeeper, who called the police. Another incident for the file. Between court appearances and lawyer meetings, I lost my job at a Seattle warehouse. The replacement hired for my position turned out to be another of the uncle's connections. Every support system I'd built crumbled under coordinated pressure. Living in my car became the new normal while the uncle occupied the woman's house with Charlie during his expanded visitation. The address where we'd been tortured became Charlie's part-time home. The irony burned worse than any punishment she'd inflicted. The grandmother found me at the courthouse one day. She begged me to let my mother rest in peace, not knowing the truth about her daughter's crimes. Her tears were real. real. Her pain was real. The woman had destroyed so many lives, and the destruction continued even after her death. My investigation into the woman's past caused Charlie's teacher to be suspended. Someone reported that she'd failed to notify authorities about obvious signs of abuse. Her suspension pending investigation meant her daughter asked why mommy couldn't teach anymore. Another innocent life damaged by proximity to our tragedy. The teacher's husband confronted me outside the grocery store. He threatened consequences if I didn't stop spreading conspiracy theories that were ruining their livelihood. I understood his anger. I was destroying good people's lives trying to save my brother. Despite knowing the collateral damage I was causing, I couldn't stop. Charlie needed me to fight, even if it meant burning down everything around us. The public defender assigned to help us asked a question that haunted me. What if the woman really had been protecting us from ourselves? What if we were as damaged as she'd always claimed? I couldn't answer immediately. During a custody hearing, I admitted to drugging the woman to access the floorboard. The judge's expression hardened. Truth became confession. Survival became crime. My credibility evaporated with each honest word. Evidence from the floorboard included our father's journal. His final entries expressed fear of both his sister and his wife. What if I chose wrong? He'd written. Even he'd started doubting reality under the woman's manipulation. The uncle's lawyer filed an emergency motion for immediate permanent guardianship, while my lawyer sat in traffic court for another client. The uncle's true belief emerged during a mediation session. He genuinely thought the woman had saved us from violent parents. His delusion was real, built on years of his sister's lies. He wanted to avenge the sister he'd loved despite her crimes. Or maybe because he couldn't face what she'd really been. Recording Charlie's meltdowns for court meant breaking promises I'd made to protect his dignity. I told him it was for his own good while positioning my phone to capture his worst moments. The protective brother disappeared entirely, replaced by someone cold and strategic. Manipulating the uncle's daughter to access his phone felt like crossing a final moral line. She'd been kind to Charlie during visits. She didn't deserve to be used, but I needed the evidence on that phone. The uncle's overconfidence in family court had led him to admit knowledge of the woman's instability in text messages. Small victories felt hollow when Charlie asked if the uncle could visit sometimes. We sat crying together in the courthouse bathroom, two broken brothers who'd survived hell only to face a different kind of torture. The system meant to protect children had become another weapon against us. The uncle's counterclaim gained traction with each passing week. My homelessness and instability made me appear unfit. His stable home and steady income looked better on paper than my car and unemployment. Truth mattered less than appearance in family court. Everything came down to the woman's original therapist's sealed records. Whatever was in those files would either damn us completely or reveal the pattern of delusion we'd lived under. The waiting felt like another form of torture. My past kindness to the uncle's daughter became leverage against me. She texted asking why I was being mean to her daddy. Her innocent question carved out what remained of my conscience. Using children to fight battles felt too much like something the woman would have done. The woman's book club and PTA friends chose sides based on donation histories and social standing. Those who'd benefited from her generosity defended her memory. Those she'd snubbed suddenly remembered odd moments that made sense in hindsight. The community split along lines of comfort versus truth. Family court's priorities became clear during a settlement conference. The judge explained that living situation mattered more than past events. Stability trumped truth. Charlie needed a home, medication, routine, not a brother living in a car fighting windmills. Desperation led me to our father's military unit roster. His brothers in arms owed combat debts that death hadn't erased. I called in his markers, begging for help from men who'd loved him. One former soldier confirmed our father's fears about his sister, but wouldn't testify publicly. His partial help felt like another small betrayal. Discovery documents revealed our father had been gathering evidence of the woman's instability before his death. Police reports from her teenage years, psychiatric holds, restraining orders from ex-boyfriends. He'd known what she was and tried to protect us. The timeline became clear. She'd culled them when he'd threatened to have her committed. The psychiatric hold paperwork was dated the day before their murders. The storage facility smelled like dust and forgotten memories when I finally tracked down our father's military footlocker. The manager had been reluctant to let me access it without proper documentation, but I'd convinced him by showing the death certificate and explaining about the custody battle. Inside, beneath his dress uniform and medals, I found what I'd been searching for, a cassette recorder wrapped in plastic. The tape inside was labeled in his handwriting. I played it in my car, hands shaking as his voice filled the small space. He'd recorded the woman threatening our parents if they tried to take us away. Her voice was calm, methodical, explaining exactly how she'd make it look like an accident. The recording cut off mid-sentence, but it was enough. I made copies at 3 different stores, paranoid about losing this evidence. The uncle's overconfidence in court filings had already given me ammunition. He'd admitted knowing the woman was unstable, but insisted she'd been a good mother despite her issues. That admission combined with this recording could shift everything. The final custody hearing arrived faster than expected. The courtroom was packed with community members who'd chosen sides. Some genuinely believed the woman's version of events. Others had started questioning the narrative as more evidence emerged. The woman's empty chair at the plaintiff's table still commanded fear, her presence lingering even in death. Charlie rocked constantly in his seat beside me while I held the evidence folders with trembling hands. The uncle sat across the aisle with his lawyer, still believing he was saving us from ourselves. His daughter wasn't there, kept away from the ugly reality of what her father was fighting for. The judge called for opening statements, but I barely heard them. My focus was on the moment when I'd present the recording. The woman's own documentation would speak for her, revealing the truth through her own words. Years of careful manipulation would unravel in her own handwriting. A grief counselor who'd submitted an affidavit for the uncle took the stand first. Under questioning, she admitted the woman had confessed to saving boys from evil parents during their sessions. The counselor had thought she meant emotionally, not literally. Her face paled as she connected the dots in real time. The judge ordered ordered psychological evaluations for all parties, including the uncle. The court would need to understand how deep the woman's influence ran, how many people she'd convinced of her delusions. The uncle's lawyer objected, but the judge's expression suggested he'd seen enough family court cases to recognize when something was deeply wrong. When the woman's original therapist's records were finally unsealed, the courtroom fell silent. Page after page documented her delusional disorder. The therapist had noted the patient's belief that her brother had plotted against her, that she needed to save his children from him. The evidence proved the murders, but also showed the woman genuinely believed she was saving us. The uncle's breakdown happened gradually. As each piece of evidence was presented, his certainty crumbled. The recording of his sister's threats, the psychiatric holds, the pattern of manipulation spanning decades. He needed to believe she'd been good to preserve his own sanity, but reality was forcing its way through. I watched him struggle with the truth about the sister he'd loved. His lawyer tried to maintain the narrative, but even he seemed shaken by the evidence. The woman's mental illness had been so carefully hidden, her manipulations so complete, that even those closest to her had been fooled. The judge asked me directly if I wanted the uncle prosecuted for knowingly harboring children with a murderer. The question hung in the air while I considered our options. Charlie needed stability more than I needed vengeance. The uncle had been another victim of the woman's lies, even if he'd enabled her crimes through willful blindness. I told the judge that Charlie needed family, even broken family. I asked for the uncle to get help, not jail time. The courtroom stirred at this unexpected mercy. The uncle's tears seemed genuine as he processed both the truth about his sister and my decision not to destroy him. The custody ruling came down clearly. I would retain full custody of Charlie, with the uncle getting supervised visitation after completing a treatment program. The judge recognized that healing would take time for everyone the woman had touched. The survivor benefits would be restored to us, the money the woman had stolen finally returning to its intended purpose. Outside the courthouse, the community divided along new lines. Those who'd suspected something was wrong felt vindicated. Those who'd enabled the woman through ignorance or comfort faced uncomfortable questions about their role. The neighborhood association would split over discussions of how they'd failed to see the signs. Charlie and I returned to Seattle that evening, scarred but together. The woman's money would become Charlie's therapy fund, ensuring he got the help he needed to process everything we'd survived. The apartment felt different somehow, lighter without the weight of constant fear and legal battles. The uncle's first supervised visit came 3 months later. He'd completed his initial treatment and seemed genuinely committed to understanding how he'd been manipulated. Charlie was cautious but willing to try. Family could be rebuilt, even from the ashes of such destruction. 6 months after the custody ruling, we stood at our parents' real graves. The headstones finally bore their true names, the lies that had hidden them for so long finally corrected. Charlie held the brass key in his hand, the symbol of our captivity transformed into something else. He placed it between the two graves with careful precision. The key that had once locked away evidence of murder now rested with the victims. Charlie's words were simple but profound. It opens the truth now. The brass had tarnished, but its meaning had changed entirely. I realized then what justice really meant. Not revenge or punishment, but acceptance. Evil sometimes wore love's face, twisted genuine emotion into something monstrous. The woman had probably loved us in her broken way, even as she destroyed us. Survival meant choosing which version of family to trust, which connections to rebuild. The burn scars on my hand would never fully fade. Charlie's jaw would always click slightly when he chewed. Trust would come slowly, if at all. But we were Adam and James legally now, even if we'd always be Ryan and Charlie in our hearts. The names we'd chosen for ourselves mattered as much as the ones we'd been given. Standing there between our parents' graves, I understood that some wounds never fully heal. Some truths are too complex for simple resolution. But we'd survived. We'd found our way back to who we were meant to be, and maybe that was enough.